Welcome to the 2017 NUIC football season. Shane Carey and I are back to bring you what looks to be like another great season in the NUIC. Shane, what do you want to talk about as far as how the Upstate side of the conference fell in last year?
Well, obviously, some points of interest was Stockton basically running the table and then having that huge fallout in the playoffs. Another point of emphasis that'll carry over into this year was Aquin going further than we thought they would, all the way to that quarterfinal matchup with Marquette where they had a chance to win the game but ultimately fell short there towards the end. And then, you'll have Milledgeville, looks to be on the rise, as well as Orangeville. Stockton, we figure, will be somewhere in between. So a lot of exciting things to look forward to this coming year.
Yeah, like you stated, Orangeville. I mean, we had talked about it last year where they were 4-4, and they had to get into that Week 9 matchup at that record to take on Polo. They lost big to Polo that game, which set up a road game for Polo in the first round against Dakota, which we already had known it was going to go in the favor of the Indians.
Right.
And it pretty much did once a certain somebody re-entered the game. But Orangeville's on the rise this year. Milledgeville has a lot of people back. On top of that, they won the Fresh Soft Conference last year. And then, like you said, with Stockton, we don't know what to expect there as they were very senior-heavy. And then Aquin, I mean, we had predicted Aquin would be about a 5-4, 6-3 type team, and then they end up going 8-1, and like you said, going on that playoff run.
Right, and that's something that's a little more unique to the Upstate Division, whereas in the Northwest, you have your top teams. You're pretty confident where they're going to fall, but the Upstate, you got your upper-level teams in your middle, but those upper-level teams can finish in any way.
Right, and that's one of the things that we saw last year, too, especially after about Week 3. We saw where the middle level actually expanded.
Right.
And then even River Ridge got in there late in the season, pulled out a couple wins. And I think had they had that kind of play earlier in the season, they may have won a couple more games, too.
Right. So you never know how things are going to go in the Upstate Division. Definitely will be exciting, though.
Yes, it will. So in the Upstate Conference, Shane, the last 6 seasons has seen Stockton be the top of the conference titles, or have won the conference titles 5 out of those 6 seasons, with the exception of 2014 where there was actually a 3-way tie with them, Aquin, and Polo. Now, with the changing of the head coaching position at Stockton, and of course the big loss of players that they have there, is this a season that we could see a changing of the guard in the Upstate side of the conference?
Oh, I think that's actually more likely than to say it's possible. I look for Stockton to fall a little bit. Like you said, Thornton had a good sustained success, I'd say. And with a new coaching change, I think Snyder's going to do a good job. It's just it might take a little while to get going. And then you group that with a loss of talent, it has a way of trickling on down to the standings.
I mean, you look at Stockton last year, you take Hayden Fox out of the equation, not only do you lose your most prolific quarterback in school history, but you lost your whole offense.
Right.
I mean, he threw for the most yards, he was up in on the most touchdowns for the team, and he led the team in rushing as well.
Right, and part of Stockton's downfall was the fact that they were so one-dimensional and based with him, and the fact that they were winning such big games, they didn't actually play full games, and that ended up coming back to bite them a little bit in the playoffs.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And if you look at the last time that Stockton missed the playoffs, it was 2010, and the conference champion that year was East Dubuque, who is no longer even in the Upstate side of the conference.
Right, things have a way of shuffling around in a hurry every couple of years.
So it'll be interesting to see how this breaks down and who will be that changing of the guard team. All right, so the first team we're going to look at is up in Warren, where the Warriors came back last year after making 2 consecutive runs to the playoffs and went 2-7 last year overall and 2-6 in the Upstate Conference. It was the first time in 3 seasons that they missed the playoffs. Shane, do you think that they can rebound this year and get back to the playoffs in 2017?
Well, I think it's going to be really tough. We look at a number of things when we're trying to figure out how teams are going to be the following year. I mean, we haven't seen them on the field. Practice hasn't kicked in. It's really hard telling right now. But thing that we really look at is the key returners, and Warren really doesn't have a lot coming back to him this year.
They don't. I mean, their key returners right now are Logan Hess, who's on both the offensive and defensive lines. You got Colton Kaiser, who is an honorable mention all-conference offensive lineman and also plays the other side on the defensive line. And then you got Garrett Williams at receiver, who was barely used really as a receiver, only collecting 3 receptions for 76 yards, going for 1 touchdown last year. And like you said, the schedule, I mean, you got a crossover game with Lena Winslow and our great nemesis of South Beloit in their non-conference game that they're going to have.
Right.
But South Beloit did go 4-5 last year, so that could be a good matchup for Warren. But it could also be a pivotal matchup for South Beloit in the same realm.
Right, and another thing to keep an eye on is how the dismantling of their co-op actually takes effect on this team.
Yeah, that's true, because the team that they were co-oping with outside of Rockford left them and has decided to form up their own team with increase in enrollment this year. So that'll be interesting to see. I know that they did lose 1 key player off of that would have been returning this year, and Paul Bijanis. Sorry if I butchered his name, but
it happens.
It happens. But he was him and his brother last year were both key players, and Paul will be an incoming junior this year for that team over in Rockford. So it'll be I think it'll be a tough fight for Warren, especially looking at their schedule. They start off at home with Stockton coming to town, so that's going to be a tough one, and then they follow that up in week 2 with Aquin.
Right. Then week 3 with Orangeville, and we look for them to be improved this year. So obviously it's tough out the gate for Warren. They have a good coach in McNutt. I'm sure he'll have them ready to go, but we'll see how things shake out.
Right, and I mean that's going to be one of the biggest issues that they have, because as of right now they have 6 true varsity players. So they're going to be pulling up some sophomores and possibly freshmen to fill out their varsity roster this year.
Right, and that definitely takes a toll on the kids.
Yeah, it definitely does, because, I mean, how are you going to play for a full 48 minutes when you're playing both ways with a depleted roster?
Right.
Like you said, it takes a toll on you. So next stop is going to take us to Hanover and the River Ridge Wildcats. Last year, River Ridge finished 2-7, and they also finished 2-6 in the Upstate Conference last year. Really, they had a nice turnaround season coming off of an 0-9 season.
Right.
Many of us had predicted them to go 0-9 again last year, but this year they do have a lot of returners coming back, so we should see a little bit more improvement out of them, and we even talked about that last season with the Wildcats, how we could see that they were improving week to week going through the season, and with a lot of those kids coming back this year.
Exactly, and it's hard to do on the high school level to carry that year to year, but they definitely put a foundation in place to be able to build. We were talking a little bit ago that River Ridge might not be a playoff team, but they could definitely surprise a few people and play playoff-capable football.
Oh, yes. I mean, they have all the right ingredients with quite a few linemen returning. They got their quarterback coming back, a few key receivers, and then, of course, playing both ways, those guys are going to be going on the opposite sides of the ball. One of the big notable returners is their quarterback, Jacob Spear, who threw for 812 yards last season on top of rushing for 220 yards, combining for a total of 6 touchdowns. So there's areas where they need to improve to get more scores on the board, but you can see, I mean, just based off of those numbers alone, they were starting to get successful at the end of the year.
Right.
You add in a few other guys like Ben Christ. Granted, he's a running back and defensive back. He didn't get a bulk of carries. I think he only had about 17 carries last year. But with Marcelo Diaz graduating, that should open up more room for him to be in there. And then you got Drew Kloss at wide receiver, and then your linemen. I mean, you got Brino Ravelli coming back. You got Nick Giroux coming back. Devin Keister's back. And then you got another one that you can look for in Nathan Pratt as well. And we talked about their line size last year, about how they were definitely getting bigger in size. So it should be pretty interesting for them coming back this year.
Right, and as far as size, you'd like to think that they're going to be a little bit bigger even at this next year after growth in the off season. We looked at the roster and we're counting 12 guys coming back, And the good thing about small school football is, a majority of those, if not all of them, are playing both sides of the ball. So you take all 11 positions on both sides of the ball, and you would almost hope to guarantee that you're going to be improved at that position from last year.
Right, and like you said, 12 guys coming back that all put in significant amount of varsity playing time last year in what was actually a very competitive Upstate division outside of the Blackhawks. So that could be a big key for their success in the upcoming season.
Right, and you're talking about the quarterback as a sophomore last year, so a junior this year, obviously he's just got more room to grow and be the leader out on the field. So you look at that and you really think you like your chances at that position even better this year.
Right, and then you're going to have another running back / defensive lineman coming back in John Herring. And then Devontae Tilley, he didn't have many carries last year. He had about 13 attempts for 66 yards. But you get that back, and then there's Tyler Sevi as well. He had 8 attempts along with 3 receptions last year. So those guys can become very impact-type players coming into the 2017 season.
Exactly. And like we said, we don't really know what to expect out of them yet. Obviously, we hope to see some improvement, and I think they're a team that we could definitely watch as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think that this River Ridge team is going to be competitive this year. I'm not going to sit there and float their boat saying that they're going to be conference title contenders, but I definitely see them as a team that, as long as everybody's eligible at the start of the season, everybody's healthy at the start of the season, you're going to see a competitive team here.
Well, and that's just it. I mean, getting out of the gate, you got a tough Week 2 matchup with Orangeville, but you look at their first 4 games, and I don't think they're going to be overmatched.
Yeah, and I mean, their crossover game this year is with Galena, and then they have a non-conference game with Mooseheart, and Mooseheart's been down the last couple of years, especially in a depleted NAC conference over there to the east of us.
So I think River Ridge will definitely have some opportunities.
They definitely have opportunities to grow, win some ball games, and maybe even fight for that 5th win and get into the playoffs. So our next stop is going to take us down to Raider Nation, where we're going to AFC. Last year they were 2-7 in the overall record and 2-6 in the Upstate Conference. So as you see, we had a lot of 2-6 teams here in the Upstate. Last 3 actually, AFC, River Ridge, and Warren. The Raiders actually had a lot of potential last year, but they kind of underperformed really. Do you think they'll bounce back here in 2017 to make the playoffs?
Well, I certainly think they have the capability to do so. But we also said that last year. You look at last year, and they were in a lot of games, and there were some games that they should have won but didn't. But that's the way it goes sometimes. You can't go back and play them now. All you can do is keep moving forward for this year. A lot of guys going to be returning for the Raiders. I think that they have an opportunity to do so. They'll have a difficult crossover with Dakota, but we'll see how the schedule shakes out and everything. But
yeah, like you said, the difficult crossover with Dakota, but they're non-conference games against Varna Midland, River Valley, so that should be a very easy win for them.
So in reality, that could offset if they were to lose that crossover.
So, yeah, it's going to come down to AFC winning conference games in order for them to make the playoffs. And looking at their schedule, I mean, they're starting off the gates with River Ridge, a team last year that they lost to. But at the beginning of the season, you picked them to beat River Ridge.
Exactly. That could be a very interesting game this year.
But then you follow that up in Week 2 and 3 with Dakota and Aquin. And then Week 4, they're going to Orangeville. And we look for big things out of Orangeville, like you stated already. So their first 4 weeks are going to be pretty tough. They could see themselves in a hole. But like you said, they got quite a few returning players, a good amount of returning players coming back this year that saw some significant varsity playing time. The biggest one, in my opinion, is going to be Mike Thompson on the offensive and defensive lines, where he garnered honorable mention all conference last year. He had that in with middle linebacker and running back Adam Hart. He ran for 265 yards last year, but between both those guys and the work that they've put in this offseason already, you should start to see things turn around. They also got their wide receiver and Cody Pennick back, and then another key offensive defensive lineman in Garrett Drew. And then you can throw in Caleb Drew coming back at quarterback. So AFC is looking pretty good.
Right, a lot of your key positions returning, that usually sets you up for success as the year goes on. You know, you also have some role players step in, take place of those guys who've graduated. You know, it's a never-ending cycle.
Yeah, like you said, I mean, you got Sam Hahn and Caleb McBride who are coming back. They didn't have a lot of impact last year, but you could see them getting more impact this year. And then Nathan Page, both on the offensive line and at the linebacker positions to fill the vacated roles. So those guys should be able to do pretty decent for the AFC Raiders in the Upstate Conference this year.
I couldn't agree more. And like you said, the schedule isn't exactly favorable, but that's one of the things when you play in the NUIC every week, you're playing a good opponent. So it's going to be up to AFC whether they make the playoffs or not anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, and they had definitely showed that they had the potential to be there.
Right.
Like you said, 2-7 last season, but how many games were they in that they actually lost? I mean, they played Aquin pretty darn good.
Right.
And came up on the downside. Same with Milledgeville. So, I mean, it's not like they were getting blown out. There were games that they probably, looking back at last year, they're like, yeah, we should have won that.
Exactly.
All right, a team that we look to be much improved this year coming into the season is the Orangeville Broncos. Last year, they finished at 4-5, and they were 4-4 in the Upstate Conference. Shane, is this the year that the Broncos can get back to the playoffs since the Golombeski era?
I believe it is. You know, we saw last year they finished 4-5, had a chance to beat Polo to get into the playoffs. Didn't happen. We kind of expected it to go that way, but big things this year for the Broncos. I'm really looking forward to actually covering this team this year.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at last year, for example, I mean, one of the things that we saw when we were at that Polo game is they basically became very predictable. They almost went with an Austin guy, bootleg to the right all game, looking either for Caden Getz or Guy to tuck it and run.
Right.
Which can work, but against the better teams, it's never going to work, especially when you become that predictable. But speaking of that, they do have a lot of key returners, and they were a very young team last year.
Right.
But their two biggest leaders are going to be seniors this year.
Right. You got a lot coming back and on key positions. You got your quarterback, awesome guy, one of the premier quarterbacks in the conference, I believe.
Oh, he is. I mean, you look at what he has done. I mean, both on offense and defense, playing the quarterback and DB positions. I mean, last year he was a first-team all-conference defensive back, and he was honorable mention as a utility player, and that was basically saying, hey, you're going to be honorable mention because we already filled up our quarterback position, so you got it.
Right, and that was obviously going to happen with Fox over in Stockton. So that was a good award to win because when you're going up against Fox in that situation, like you said, our quarterback position is taken. We think you're a good quarterback. We just can't put you over the next level.
Right, exactly. And then, you combine that with Caden Getz coming back. Caden Getz was a first-team all-conference wide receiver, and he was also an honorable mention all-conference defensive back. He was also one of the top receivers that came back, he was one of the top receivers last season. In fact, had it not been for the playoffs, he would have led the entire area in yards with his 687 yards on 37 receptions, and he was second in touchdowns at 10.
Right. And not only that, but you also have good running backs coming back, too, that can go hand-in-hand with their offensive attack.
Yeah, I mean, you got Dalton Lowe coming back, and you got Garrett Rodabaugh coming back. Both guys were young guys last year. I mean, Lowe was only a freshman. Rodabaugh, I believe, was a freshman as well. So you got both those guys coming back. They got that extra year of experience, and then you add guys like Colt Oaks on the offensive and defensive lines, and then you got Brandon Rates coming back at linebacker. Granted, he's listed as a running back as well, so he could see some carries, and he did see about 20 carries last year. But then you got Trey Sullivan and Ian Wilson also coming back on your offensive lines. And then there is another option there. He didn't get a lot of playing time last year, but he might get a little bit more this year in Brayton Schofield as well.
Right. So obviously there's plenty of opportunities for Orangeville. And when you're talking about freshman running backs getting close to 5 yards a carry as a freshman, and the NUIC with Dalton Lowe. I mean, he's only got room to grow.
Right, and I mean, if you know Orangeville and you know that their state championship, their lone state championship came in 1989, and it was led by Garrett Rodeball's dad, Coach Rodebaugh now.
It's already a story in the making.
Right. I mean, not saying Orangeville's going out and winning state this year because honestly, I don't feel that they are capable of winning state this year. Sorry, Coach Doyle, but at the same token, I definitely see Orangeville being very competitive, and as long as they can play to their potential, things are going to look good for them.
And I couldn't agree more. You know, you're looking at playing up to your potential, and with a small school like Orangeville and your key guys, you got to stay away from that injury bug because one injury to Austin Guy, and before you know it, your season's over.
Right, correct. And then you look at like their non-conference games against Kirkland, Hiawatha, and then they got that crossover game with East Dubuque again. The same crossover that they had last year. East Dubuque came into Orangeville last year and beat them. It's time for a little revenge this year,
And I think they'll get it.
I agree. From Orangeville to Milledgeville, the Missiles were 5-5 last year and were 5-3 in the Upstate Conference. They lost in the first round to Marquette of Ottawa, 9-6 on a controversial field goal at the end of the game that saw Marquette actually take that victory all the way to the semifinals. With some key returners coming back and a good group of young kids coming up to varsity as they won the Fresh Off Conference Championship last year, Shane, will the Missiles improve on last year's season?
I think most definitely they will. You look at that 5-4 last year, had a tough first-round opponent who ended up going pretty far in the playoffs. You know, by all intents and purposes, thought that worse the game would have been sent into, overtime rather than that field goal. But obviously that's something for the Missiles to build on. You know, you look at that 5-4, and it's like, okay, how can we improve on that? And you bring in your key returners and also your key kids from the Fresh Soft team that won the conference championship. It definitely points to good things for the Missiles.
Yeah, and I can't disagree there. I mean, they got quite a bit coming back this year outside of a quarterback. But you got some key offensive and defensive linemen and Kyle Kendall and Alex Brawl coming back. And then you add in also Keaton Casares and Blaine Kappas. I mean, you got a good core of linemen coming back right there. And then you can bring in, Carson Boyer and Christian Tom Smith and even Nate Ron. All three of them were running backs. Granted, Carson Boyer out of those three got the most carries last year, but you got some weapons coming back that can do some damage, especially coming through in the upstate side of the conference.
Right. You look at this side of the conference compared to the other side, and this side of the conference, I feel like you can have a few more holes that you need to fill because the competition isn't necessarily up to par with the other side of the conference. If you had all these holes, you're looking for a quarterback and other key areas on the northwest side of the conference, you might have a little more tough sledding.
Oh, I definitely agree. And then you take a look at like their schedule. I mean, right out of the gates, they're hitting the crossover game with Amboy, another team that came into the NUIC last year, who we thought might be decent. We didn't predict them to be decent, but we thought that they would be more competitive than they actually were last year. But
they're a big physical team. They just didn't put all the pieces together.
Right, correct. And Amboy is going to be a tough first game opponent for Milledgeville, but it's definitely a game I can see either team pulling out to start the season off. And then their other one is against Varna Midland River Valley. The same opponent AFC will be playing in their non-conference game as well.
Right, and you look at that game as kind of start the buses up, let's get to the field, play a good game, keep everybody healthy, and come out with a victory.
Right. I mean, that should be a running clock type game if you have the potential to carry that through. Some other key players, too, that they'll be bringing back is Cade Shavy as well, who played at end and cornerback last year. So, I mean, Milledgeville looks pretty good, especially considering, they won the Fresh Off. I don't put a lot of weight on Fresh Off championships Because how many teams around the area have sophomores pulled up to varsity that are playing at the varsity level?
Well, that's just it. Your top tier teams on both sides of the conference do it. You know, if you look, Valentine and Lena Winslow's been varsity for years. Same thing with Forreston's Premier guys. You know, it's nice to put in your gym on your football placard, but it doesn't mean anything.
Right, exactly. I mean, it does show that they have players that know how to win,
Exactly.
and they're coming up to the varsity level. It just shows you the difference between fresh soft football to the varsity level of football. It's a totally different ball game.
Step up.
And, it's a much faster paced game and everything else. But it should be a very good year for Milledgeville, in my opinion. I wouldn't think that you would disagree with me on that one.
Not at all.
And looking for a lot of big things out of Missiles this year. This next team had won the conference title outright 2 seasons ago. The year before sharing the conference title, we're talking about the Polo Marcos. And Polo actually went 6-4 last year, 6-2 in the Upstate. And I feel that some of that was some adverse effects that they felt from the 2015 season when they literally blew everybody away.
Right. The old saying, what goes around comes around. And I think Polo obviously made enough wins to get into the playoffs. But if you look at their losses, you know, teams didn't hesitate to run up the scores on Polo if they could.
Oh, Stockton took luxury in it last year. We were there to see that firsthand, and I tell you what, the Stockton faithful was all about keep pouring on the points because they wanted to show Polo what it was like.
Right, and you know, ultimately they go 5-4 or 6-3. I apologize, and have a tough first round game in Dakota where if Dakota would have been full staffed, it wouldn't even been a game.
Right. I mean, you take a look at that game. They lost in the first round of Dakota last year in Dakota, 42-21. And they had the lead in that game at halftime. But then, you know, things happen and people returned the games and Dakota ran away with it.
Right.
Yeah. So they got some few key returners coming back this season. Do you think they still have enough in the tank and what they have coming back to make the playoffs again?
Well, I think they'll be close. I don't have them making the playoffs this year. Definitely right around the cutoff. You get to 4-5, 5-4. You know, you put yourself in a good position. But what's going to hurt Polo is their out of conference opponent. Whether they're going to have enough wins from them as far as playoff points are concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you say
if
that.
You go 5-4.
Right, and you say that. I mean, their out-of-conference opponent is Edwardsville Lutheran, which last year they co-opted with Madison. Both schools dissolving that co-op going in this year. But for the last 2 seasons, as a co-op, they were 0-9 each of the last 2 seasons. Much of that's probably going to be expected between both Edwardsville Lutheran and Madison, which we're going to see this year, as Dupec will end up playing Madison in Week 6 this year, and Polo is playing Edwardsville Lutheran at home in Week 3.
Right. So, realistically, if you want to talk about the playoffs for Polo, you're going to have to find a way to get to that 6th win. I just don't know if they have enough coming back, talent-wise, to get close to that.
Well, let's think about it. In order for them to do that, to guarantee to be in, they're going to have to go 6-2 in the Upstate Conference again this year, which they did last year, because you look at their Week 9 opponent in their crossover game, and they got the EPC Wildcats. Granted, they're playing at home, but there again, here's another crossover that was the exact same opponent from the season before, and EPC just railed them last year.
Right, and then we talked about a couple teams that are on the rise, we think, this year, which Polo beat both Orangeville and Milledgeville last year as well.
And both those schools got more returners than Polo.
As well as River Ridge. So, you know, those are 3 teams right there that you could almost, last year and the year before, obviously, put on your schedule as wins, that this year might not be the case.
Exactly. I mean, and really for Polo, I mean, their big key returners are going to be retailer, at running back and linebacker, where he was voted as a first-team all-conference utility player, basically because, I mean, he only had He didn't have a lot of carries last year. He only had about 25 receptions coming out of the backfield. And he was a very solid linebacker. So you're going to see that. You got Braden Solto returning at quarterback, who was only a sophomore last year, incoming junior. He threw for 634 yards, but you look at his touchdown total, he only threw for 2 touchdowns, and then he rushed for another. Randall Gabaldon, who actually started off as their starting quarterback last year, will be back as well. He was replaced by Solto later on, but I think he'll be playing in other roles as you go on. And then you look at their line. You got Casey Thacker and Luke Peterson back. And then you got a good receiver in Bailey Winkin, even though he wasn't used very much. So
Right, and Polo always has a way of being competitive, so they definitely have that in their favor too.
They do, and I think the Polo Marcos will be right on the cusp of making the playoffs. So going from one school that we don't expect to do a whole lot, we go to another one that we expect to do a lot, and that's the Aquin Bulldogs. Last year, we really didn't see Aquin coming in as a big threat to get places, but they ended up going 10-2 last year, 7-1 in the Upstate, and then they lost that very tight, very exciting quarterfinal game to Marquette, 24-21, a game that I feel that they probably should have won.
I would agree. I mean, they had an opportunity to win. Not to rip on coaching or anything, but a couple different play calls, and you never know what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you get in that situation, you got 3rd and 1, and then you go for it on 4th and 1. You only need a yard.
Not a 15.
You call
pass.
2 pass plays, and the quarterback throws it to the back of the end zone. Is that quarterback related, or is that coaching related? You don't know. You only need a yard. You got 2 capable running backs. Run the ball.
Exactly, and that leads us on to where we are this year is player growth. And Aquin really has a lot coming back where these kids are going to grow.
They do. I mean, they got a lot of key offensive weapons on a very loaded team that we see heavily favored to win the Upstate side of the conference this year. And speaking of that, you got Jonah Deemer coming back at that quarterback position. Last year he threw for 2,120 yards. 27 touchdowns, led the entire area in passing yards, and then he racked up another 102 yards on the ground with another touchdown. And if he can repeat last season, again this season, as far as stat-wise, you're looking at Jonah Deemer as being one of the most prolific quarterbacks that the NUIC has seen in a long, long time.
Definitely an all-state caliber player.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's just a shame that even last year with them kind of stats, that he didn't even make all conference.
Right.
I mean, how did the conference teams not even vote him in? I mean, I'm shocked by that.
Right.
And then you look at a supporting cast. You got Cole Ludeking and Cole Stiegel back, both running backs. Cole Ludeking was a first-team all-conference running back, while Cole Stiegel is honorable mention at the same position. Stiegel actually led the rushing attack with 869 yards to go along with his 15 touchdowns, while Ludeking had 627 yards and 6 touchdowns. And both of them career-wise, Stiegel's actually just over 1,000 yards, and Ludeking is just below 1,000 yards. So these guys can run the ball, and they're used a lot on defense as well. I mean, Ludeking plays the linebacker position, Stiegel plays at defensive end, so you got a lot there.
Exactly, and you look at all the players that are coming back, and just short of a few linemen, you look on both sides of the ball, and their premier units are all coming back.
Right. I mean, they do have 2 linemen coming back in Jackson Holder and Colton Neubauer, but then you go back to your offensive weapons. You look at your wide receivers. You got Bryce Carlson and Zach Cummins both returning. Cummins was actually honorable mention all-conference wide receiver. He was a first-team all-conference kicker, but he led the area last year with 778 yards receiving on 34 receptions to go along with his area-leading 11 touchdowns. And then Bryce Carlson added 676 yards, led the area with receptions with 49 and 5 touchdowns, and he's also the top receiver coming back with the most receiving yards this season as well for career stats.
Right. All ingredients lead to a great year for Aquin. although this could be the year that we don't see a 9-0 team for the first time in the Upstate Division with Aquin's crossover in Forest.
That's true. This is going to be the first time in quite a while that we're going to see the top two teams on both sides of the conference actually square off.
Right.
And in my personal opinion, that's how it should be. Where you finish the season compared to the other side of the conference, that's where the head-to-head matchup should be, not this freaking enrollment bull crap.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I mean, nobody wants to see, DuPec
play Stockton to 66-0. Who wants that?
Nobody benefits from that. But that would be a great game to watch.
Well, I tell you what, that decision's all up to the athletic directors and their board, and I hope they change that in the near future. But going back to Aquin, one of their key things that they do have coming in is they have Logan White coming in. He's transferring in from EPC. He'll be playing the running back or defensive back positions. He'll be an incoming junior this year. I'm sure he'll get some key playing time in Aquin, specifically with their numbers, but it should be fun to watch Aquin roll. All right, Stockton Blackhawks had a lot of troubles here in the off-season as they had to replace head coach Chris Thornton. But with that, they bring in head coach Jesse Snyder, who brings a lot to the table, in my opinion. Last year, Stockton did go 9-1, as you previously mentioned, going 9-0 before losing in the first round, and they went 8-0 in the Upstate. But they did lose to Salt Fork in the first round, a team that was 5-4, who probably shouldn't have been playing Stockton that close. But they pulled out the 1-point win in a 43-42 free-for-all there in the second half of the game. How will Stockton respond with so many holes to fill on both sides of the ball this year?
Well, you lose a lot. You lose a lot on players, and obviously you lose a lot with your coaching staff. You're replacing him with a good guy, but you're changing what you want to do, what you want to be known at. I mean, Stockton football will, in my opinion, always be Stockton football, but you also have to form that new identity, and that doesn't happen overnight.
It doesn't, and that's where some people fail to realize, okay? Stockton was senior heavy last year. You take a look at their starters, along with their offensive production, they pretty much lost everybody. They lost their wide receivers. They lost probably what was the best quarterback they've had in school history.
Right.
And now they got to start over because now they got a new head coach for the first time in a decade.
Right. And the thing that I like to point out, we have our technology now that gives us our information that we put in, lets us read back to you. And, you look at the returners for Stockton, an honorable mention all-conference running back, and Brian Booth, 445 yards on 31 carries and 7 touchdowns. Those are okay numbers, but you look at a lot of the remaining guys who are coming back, and you're looking at guys with 3 attempts, 19 yards, 1 attempt, 7 yards. These are the guys that are not really contributing, and then they're suddenly going to have to be the guy.
Right, and that's one of the things that I've heard from Stockton supporters all offseason. Well, Stockton has a lot coming back. A lot of guys had time at the varsity level last year. They did. In garbage time, when Hayden Fox and company were already off the field, and it's not like they were putting more points up on the board.
Right, and it's funny you mention that because these key returners could have had more time because Stockton didn't exactly call off the dogs when they probably should have.
No, you look at the game against Polo. They won that game 50-6. The starters were still in the fourth quarter with intention to rub it in against Polo from the year before.
Right.
So, I mean, they do, don't get me wrong, Stockton has good players coming back. And Jesse Snyder's a very good head coach who's also originally from the area. Right. He played under Rick Ahrens at Lena Winslow. So he's got that Stockton Lena Winslow pedigree already underneath of his belt. He ran a very sophisticated program down at Princeton. In fact, got Princeton to the 3A quarterfinals just 2 seasons ago before they lost to Immaculate Conception at the game that me and you saw. Yep. So they got some guys coming back. But as far as the key contributors, you're blowing smoke up your own butt if you think that Stockton has a lot of key contributors coming back, because they just don't.
Right.
Like you said, Brian Booth is their big contributor coming back. I also see Elijah Rowe as somebody who would be a key contributor, as he played a lot, specifically on the defensive side of the ball at his linebacker position. And then you got Luke Hushett as well, that played a lot at defensive back. Granted, he's a wide receiver on offense. He did not see a lot of playing time behind Nolan Buskey and Gavin Kramer last year. He will see that time this year. But then you got guys like Wyatt Hill and Jeremiah Herman coming back, Colin Dvorak, and then some other guys that you can look out for would be Hunter Luke and Chase Rowe and Gabe Ertmer. But none of those guys had solid playing time going into last year. I mean, you look at Hunter Luke. Hunter Luke was on our watch list last year.
Right.
He had all of 2 attempts for 8 yards last year, and he didn't play that much at the defensive back positions.
Right. So you're looking at guys even last year, like you were talking, that should have been contributing on a good Stockton team that really didn't pan out. You hope that transpires this year. But I will give Stockton credit. You know, Coach Snyder was hired, and it seemed like he was getting the team off the bus and running on their off-season programming, not wasting a lot of time.
Oh, he's not.
But one thing I do think that works against Stockton is their schedule a little bit. You know.
Yeah, I mean, you take a look at their schedule. So, you know, they're starting off with Warren on the road. Okay, chalk that up as a W with what we've already talked about with Warren earlier in the segment. But then you've got Marquette. Granted, Marquette's coming up to Stockton. People can say what they want about Marquette. I mean, we've said it ourselves. We always thought that they were a fluke coming out of the Northeast Athletic Conference. But they've been to the semifinals each of the last 2 seasons. I'm sorry, but that's no longer a fluke. That is proven that they are good and capable of winning good ball games.
Especially with the return of some of their key players.
Oh, they got a lot of key returners back. I mean, you take a look at the running back that Milledgeville knocked out in the first round of playoffs. Hell, he was only a sophomore. He was their stud running back and the returning middle linebacker. And guess what? He's healthy.
Right. But also with that tough schedule, it can be a benefit to Stockton, whereas some of these other teams are playing garbage teams. If Stockton can somehow get to 5 wins, Ottawa Marquette is going to supply them with enough playoff points to get in.
Oh, for sure, because you look at their crossover game with the Northwest Division, they got West Carroll. West Carroll's a team that last year we thought could be a playoff opponent.
Right.
And they just missed going 4-5. Because they lost that Week 9 game to Lena Winslow, which we kind of expected that to happen. But at the same token, I think West Carroll could look at that. I mean, they had a game against Amboy who went 3-6 that had they not played Amboy for their homecoming, I think West Carroll wins that game.
Right, and then you're talking playoffs for West Carroll. I mean, a lot of games, you know, that are just decided on a flip of a coin almost.
And then
you go either way.
Right. And then so we already talked about Aquin. Aquin brings back the most talent.
Right.
But then you got teams like we already said, Orangeville. They bring back more returning starters than Stockton does. River Ridge. I'm not expecting River Ridge to beat Stockton.
A little more competitive.
I see it being more competitive than the 68-0 lopsided win that they did last year, or whatever it was.
But if I recall, that was actually closer at halftime than what it was supposed to be.
Yes, it was. I mean, even River Ridge last year only lost to Polo, remember, 22-0. We were shocked by that one.
Right. So, you know, I think Stockton has a lot of work cut out in front of them. Can they get to the playoffs? We'll see.
I mean, looking at their schedule, I see a couple games where I feel that they're gonna lose.
Yep.
And then I see some games that it's gonna be a dogfight, but they can win.
Right.
But you also gotta remember, Stockton blew out everybody last year.
Right.
Until they faced Salt Fork, so they're gonna have a huge bullseye on their back because of that.
Right, and that goes back, you know, we can talk about a lot of schools within the conference as a whole. You know, you roll into Stockton, you play Aquin, Lena Winslow, Forson, Dakota, Galena. I mean, the list goes on. You know, you get in that mentality where you're getting all these teams best effort because we're going to Stockton.
Right, exactly. And I mean, Stockton, like you said, they've always carried that weight. I mean, they're the team that's had the most state championship appearances in the entire NUIC.
Right.
They also carried the most victories all time in the NUIC and the most playoff appearances. So nobody ever overlooks Stockton. They're Stockton because of their tradition. They have that tradition. They've been to the playoffs 6 straight years in a row, trying to go for that 7th time. We'll see if they get there. All right, so let's get to our predictions. I'll go ahead and take the lead on this, Shane. So in the Upstate side of the conference, I see Aquin finishing with an 8-1 record. That one blemish coming to Forreston in that crossover game. Next up, I have the Missiles of Milledgeville taking second in the conference, going 7-2. Obviously, their one loss will be to Aquin. And then I see their second loss to one of the following teams. I have, following Milledgeville, Polo, Orangeville, and Stockton. I have all 3 of them going 5-4. Kind of doing a round robin of beating each other up and finishing in that 5-4 mark. All of them potentially possible of making the playoffs. Following up that triage, I have AFC going 3-6. I just don't know if the Raiders are going to have enough to get there. I feel that they can get there, and I'm not saying that they can't. It's just where I see them falling coming into the season would be at 3-6. Another team that I could see with that same potential would be River Ridge. I have them going 2-7. But there again, it's another team where I could see them picking up a few more wins as well. One team I don't see getting a lot of wins, however, is the Warren Warriors. Unfortunately, their opportunities for playoff games have come to an end. Something needs to change there, whether they get more players coming up through the process, but only having 6 varsity players. I have Warren going 0-9 on the season.
Very well. Like you, I think Aquin's going to run the table on the Upstate Division. I have them going 8-1 with their one loss coming to force, and I think everybody's in agreement on that. Next, a team I'm kind of high on this year, the Orangeville Broncos, also going 8-1, but that one loss to Aquin, so Aquin wins the conference.
The Fighting Doyles.
Yep. Followed that would be Milledgeville at 6-3. You know, a lot of talent returning, plus the first off success. I think it's going to carry over. Stockton falling down a little bit to 5-4, but the 5th win. Also, with Ottawa Marquette as the crossover, you're probably in the playoffs. After Stockton, I have Polo going to 4-5, obviously down compared to the last couple of years. It's just the way it works sometimes.
It is.
Followed Polo with AFC at 3-6. I think we are in agreement on what AFC is and what AFC will be, and that's a good spot for them.
Right.
You and me both have Warren and River Ridge at the bottom. I, however, have Warren with that one victory over River Ridge and having River Ridge scoreless in the win column, but I think it is very much possible that River Ridge actually could win a couple games and be in contention with something down the line.
Oh, definitely. Those are some good picks. As you can see, a lot of our picks kind of mirror each other, and to be honest, as last year, we didn't do this together. We didn't plan this out. These are our own personal picks. In fact, neither one of us saw each other's until today, so that's a great thing as well. As far as our panel picks go, and this is including all of our picks here at NUIC Football Fanatics, our collective following is Aquin going 8-1, which me and Shane both agreed upon that. Polo, Milledgeville, and Stockton averaging all out at 6-3, so there's going to be a little triage there of beating each other up, but all losing to Aquin at the same time, and most likely their crossover games to the Northwest opponent. Orangeville, Jay Doyle and the boys getting a 5-4 on the year, which hopefully will be good enough to get into the playoffs, which could potentially give us that 9th playoff team.
Which I think Orangeville does need to get to 6, though, with East Dubuque's crossover.
This is true, because East Dubuque is going to be a tough opponent, but being in that tough Northwest side of the conference, they're going to need East Dubuque to pull off some miracles. AFC, basically, we have AFC finishing exactly where we said they were, 3-6. And then it comes down to River Ridge and Warren. And this more mirrors you. Both of them going 1-8. Who beats who knows. But like we both said, we could see River Ridge winning a few more games than what we picked them at. Warren, probably not so much. So that's your look at what we see the Upstate side of the conference coming down to as the season rolls on. Practices will be starting later this week. And that is where we have the Upstate at. So that brings us to the conclusion of our Upstate preview. As you can see where we stand with the Upstate side of the conference and what we look forward to in the 2017 season. Next week we'll be bringing you the Northwest side of the conference preview, along with what we predict for that side of the conference. And then shortly thereafter we'll be starting our Week 1 predictions and matchups as well.
Right, things are really going to be starting to amp up now. August is here. Practice is starting. Games will be right around the corner.
So good luck to all the fellas out there playing, and
Stay
good
healthy.
luck with Hell Week. Stay healthy, and as always, root for the NUIC.